card server. Good. Oh, and we've got people coming in. Fantastic.
It's working.
Hello. It's working. Gosh, don't say that we're actually doing a webinar from home and we're not having IT problems.
Maybe that's our issue, is that all when we're in the office we have the IT issues. When we're not in the office, we don't.
Exactly. Could be.
Could be.
So, oh, everyone's coming in thick and fast now. So are your boys happy not to go to school today, Deanne?
Oh, well, I think that they were until they got up.
I got given a list of jobs.
Then I went, there's quite a few things that need to be done. And I think it started with me throwing the cleaning bucket of products into Talon's room. Here you go. Here's your job. And then the lawn does need to be mowed. So there's quite a few things on the list.
That will keep them busy. Well, I've got one child at school in Mariba and one in Mossman. So they don't get shut down.
I bet they
today.
are not happy.
They're not happy about that either. In fact, one of them might have said, do you think if I cough a lot at school today, they'll send you me home? Like, don't you dare.
Yeah.
Do not dare.
Let's not make fun of it. We're only talking from the children perspective.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got lots of you coming along. Thank you so much for everyone jumping into this early on a Monday morning. I don't think this is how we were expecting to spend our start of our week, but I guess it was our turn, so we have to roll with it. And I guess, you know, first and foremost, before we go into the webinar, like, I think this is just a good reminder as to how serious this pandemic is. And certainly, you know, health is most important. So I think we need to bear that in mind. And as much as an inconvenience and challenging this is, we don't want anyone in our community becoming unwell. So it is really important that we do follow the government guidelines. And yeah, it's going to be a few hurdles that we have to go through, but we can muddle our way through that, whereas compromising people's health is, you know, something that people just don't come back from. So I think that's really important, particularly because we have some vulnerable communities around up in far north Queensland. So we fully endorse and fully support the government closure through this period. We're all hoping that it doesn't go more than 3 days, but whatever it is, we'll work with it and help you work with the businesses. So for those of you who haven't met me as yet, my name's Phoebe Kitto, and I'm from Human Resource Dynamics, and we've got Deanne. Wonderful Deanne.
Down here, like hours away from you.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to do our session fairly informally today, just go through a few of the basics, but then we really wanted to jump in and do some Q&A. So if you do have questions that you'd like answered, if you could just jump into the Q&A section of the webinar on your panel down the bottom there and type away, and we'll start going through some of those later on in the webinar. So I guess for those of you, let's just split this down, because I know that we've got some people that are in the Cairns region, or Palm Cove to Babinda, to be exact, which is the lockdown area. Some of you have got businesses which are south of Cairns, down Innisfail, Mission Beach way, and some of you will be up in the Port Douglas Mossman area. So kind of different scenarios in those situations. So first of all, talk us through, Deanne, if you are a business that operates in the Cairns area and you are non-essential, what do you need to do?
Well, essentially, if you are in that LGA, and that's the terminology that they're using, and you might have heard that through some of the media releases, the LGA, which is a local government area. So the two affected areas, obviously being Cairns and Yarrabah at the moment, have been put into this lockdown from 4 o'clock yesterday, expected till 4 o'clock on Wednesday, so a 3-day period. Now, if you are a non-essential business, that government directive is essentially to close for the duration of that lockdown. So that means that your business essentially should not be open and should not be trading, and your staff should not be in the workplace. You seem to be growing in headcount there, Phoebe.
I'm getting a bit of pressure from the children.
you've got the fur babies that are wanting to know all about the lockdown, because they want to know if their food is still coming into Port Douglas.
Yes, they quite like lockdowns, I think, the pets.
So do my pets love lockdown. I've realised that they have been very, very excited this morning. They're like, there's still people here. But anyway, back to the serious matter. The cute, friendly faces are just going to have to be parked to the side for a minute. So if you are a non-essential business, your business is required to be closed. And you can, and when I say closed, I mean your trading doors. So the front doors to your office location need to be closed and your employees should not be at work. So I want to park that concept just for a minute. So that is essentially what we're going to be doing with those workers when we talk about what options we have. But essentially the business itself, if you are non-essential, your business is closed, your employees are not at work.
So for those employees, do you not pay them? Do you have to pay them their annual leave? Or do you pay them long service leave, loo days, personal leave? What do or don't you pay them?
Okay, so first of all, you sort of need to break it down into small steps at a time. So the first part is that if you are a non-essential business and your business is required to be closed, the first thing that comes into play is Section 524 of the Fair Work Act, which is obviously your stand-down provisions. So those stand-down provisions actually give the employer the ability to stand down employees without pay for circumstances that are essentially beyond their control. So when we talk about government-enforced shutdowns or stoppages of work that are reasonably beyond the employer's control, the employer has, first and foremost, the ability to stand down the employees. And that's a really important step because it actually is a directive that the employer needs to give. And yes, they could do it verbally, they could do it essentially by text message, they could do it via email, but my recommendation is that they actually need to use those words. So we're standing down the workforce because of the government enforced directive, and we will be in constant communication with our employees because what we know today might be different to what we know tomorrow and then on Wednesday. So this happened all on a Sunday, and I was teaching my gym class yesterday morning and I had my phone on silent, and I come out of my gym class at 10 o'clock, and then I remembered at the coffee shop when I went to get my coffee that I had my phone on silent, put it back on, and it just went boom. Right. And so it was Sunday and it was like, okay, well, what do we do? So we're sort of scrambling. I went into the office and I got my screen and I got my laptop, and that was great. But then there are going to be employers that don't know what they can do from a working from home capacity. So they might be shuffling through that. So that's another scenario that we'll get to. But first and foremost, it is stand down, leave without pay. But during the stand down periods, it's really important that the employers know that the leave accruals for employees, like annual leave, etc., still continue to accrue, even though the employees are not being paid.
What if your employees say they want to be paid over this period, be it annual leave, personal leave, time and lieu? What are you allowed to pay them?
You are allowed to pay them. And I guess let's just try and break this conversation down into two parts. So we're talking in this first instance about employers that are required to be closed and we cannot usefully engage them. All right, so there's no work from home or no ability to do other things. So let's just try and break them into two categories. So in this case, where there's no availability to work from home or anything like that, and the doors are shut and there's nothing you can do, yes, you can then, once you've stood the employees down, that's first and foremost, you can then be in communication and essentially negotiation with your employees about the use of their annual leave. They may have some RDOs that they might have banked. They might have some toil that they have banked. So they're essentially leave entitlements that are owed to the employees. It could be long service leave if they've got that accrual. I mean, that's going to be a very small proportion of the employee workforce, but it's predominantly going to fall into that annual leave, RDOs or toil type arrangement.
What if I want to be paid my personal leave?
Well, personal leave, this is going to be a little bit of a bone of contention because let's remember that a government lockdown is not the employee's fault, but it's not the employer's fault. So you're just both following directions. Unfortunately, there seems to be a little bit of a perception probably out there, and I don't want to stereotype and I don't want to put everybody in the same bucket, that the employees think that it's the employer's fault, and so therefore the employer has a liability to make some form of payment. That's not the case. Stand down, annual leave. If you're talking about personal leave is for use when an employee is unwell and not fit for work. So in a case of a stand down, the employee is fit, able, ready to work, there's no work for them to do. So therefore, personal leave is not something that we would recommend, because they're not well, not well, if that makes sense. If they were to become unwell, and sometime in the next 3 days, assuming that the lockdown's not extended, and they were able to produce a medical certificate, yes, then they could use their personal leave. But essentially, it comes down to the fact that they have to be unwell.
Sure. So
yes, I know there's a million loopholes with that.
So, but in general, no, personal leave's not available, but they do have annual leave in toil that they could get paid or unpaid.
Yeah.
What if you're a business and they want...
Wait, go back. There's always a but. There's always a but. So you might be an essential retail business, butcher shop. I'm going to pick a butcher shop. That is an essential retail business because it's selling food. And all of the schools are shut. So you might have an employee who can't come to work because they have to provide care and support to their children. Their daycare might be shut, might be primary school age children. So then you might have some carers leave considerations there.
In that case, would you be able to get carers leave is the same as personal leave, isn't it?
Yeah, it all comes out of the same bucket.
Yeah. So you could access your personal leave if you've got the carers leave because you've got children that you have to look after.
Yes.
Because of the shutdown.
Yeah. Or any of those carers' responsibilities.
Abilities with it. Okay. That's a very good point. What about if you are a business and you do have ability for people to be able to work at home, such as yourself, for example? Oh, that's a good point. Hold on. I've just had someone come up here. A question. Patricia has said, however, schools are open for essential workers in butchers' shops. That is a good point. They can go to school.
They can. I think that the sticking point is going to be whether or not the parents actually feel comfortable or confident in sending them.
Yeah, so they'd still have an argument to say we don't feel comfortable about it. The school's closed, so.
And look, I'm not suggesting that it's a very quick, 2-minute conversation. Oh, I don't feel comfortable sending my children to school. There should be a bit more of a robust conversation about, okay, well, why, how, and sort of coming to an arrangement with the employee if that is really the case.
Sure, excellent. Thanks, Patricia, for pointing that out. Of course, the schools are open for essential workers. So going back, if you have got staff that are able to work from home remotely, how does that work? Do I have to pay you today, Deanne?
Sorry, I was reading the questions on the Q&A. I'll stop reading the questions on the Q&A. Can you repeat your question, Phoebe?
If you've got someone who can work from home, like yourself,
yes.
Do I have to pay you to work from home today?
Well, I hope so. Otherwise, I'll put leave meeting now. So let's move on from the fact that the business is closed and there's no work that can be done. All right. So then that's what we just spoke about. We've got the stand down, we've got the annual leave, and those sorts of things. Now let's look at the working from home component. So if you are a business like HR Dynamics, for example, that is fortunate enough to be able to take their work to any location and still be quite functional, then this is where Fair Work is saying that in the event of a government shutdown, they really want you to look at flexibility arrangements. And one of those flexibility arrangements, right, dot point number 1 is the ability to relocate the work or to do other work from a remote location. So I think that over the space of the last 12 months, because or a bit more, let's not forget, I think it was the 23rd of March, 2020, we did go into lockdown for a certain demographic of business. We weren't complete lockdown like we are right now. So we do have some experience in this. So we've learned that Zoom's a wonderful thing and Teams is a wonderful thing. And we're a lot more portable than we were, say, 2 years ago. So if you have employees that can work from home and can functionally work from home, then yes, allow them to work from home. You still need to make sure that you've got all of your working from home assessment checklists and all of those sorts of things. And look, I fully expect that there's some employers out there that probably won't have those documents ready for today. don't be so concerned about that. If you're scrambling, trying to go, okay, well, what are we going to do? Let's put some plans in place, and you may get the documentation in line, probably ready for Wednesday, ready for when it closes or the restrictions lift, but you still need to get to that point. If you've got employees that can partially work from home, in that they might be able to do 50% of the work, this is where the flexibility and the negotiation comes in between the employer and the employee to say, well, look, we can reasonably get you to do A, B, C, and D, but we can't get you to do the other proportion of your work. So why don't we look at some form of arrangement rather than standing you down? We can still actively engage you, but we may be only able to engage you for, say, 4 hours a day rather than 7.6 or 8 hours a day, and what we're going to do for the rest of those hours. So flexibility is the number one point that Fair Work is driving home in relation to these lockdowns. But flexibility has to be mutually agreed, because my catchphrase for the day is JobKeeper's done and dusted, but COVID is not. So we don't have the JobKeeper enabling directives. We don't have the ability just to be able to assume that we can change hours under the safety of JobKeeper. That's done. Is it coming back? Can I go to Bora Bora next year? I don't know. That is really a crystal ball type question, and we just don't have any information about that. We don't have
what
it
if
right
what
now.
if you directed me to work from home and said, look, I need you to do this, and could be full-time hours or part-time hours, and I say, nah, bugger off, I don't want to work from home?
Well, I think that potentially comes into a disciplinary type conversation, because the employer is enforcing a government lockdown. It's not that the employer is just choosing to do this willy-nilly. They're following their instructions. So there's a reasonable expectation that the employees will follow their instructions. So I think that if that was the case, it is a different conversation for us to have, but it would be, I think, determined that employee is failing to carry out a lawful directive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But you probably do have to look at the circumstances. So if I said, well, I can't work from home because I've got 3 young children that I've got to care for, then it may be reasonable to.
Yeah, but I mean, let's go back to the flexibility component. So I have 3 young children that I have to care for, and look, I think that I'm making up a scenario here. I can work really early in the morning when they're asleep, and I can work in the evening. So I'm happy, rather than taking my annual leave or not being paid, I'm happy to work around the children and do those proportions of work when I can, if that suits the employer. And this is where that negotiation and the flexibility comes in. We've got a round hole and we've got a square peg, and we're trying to make the two fit together. So if that is a potential situation, absolutely progress that further with your employees. But again, the documentation and the evidence about what the arrangement is and how the arrangement came to be is going to be critical.
Because that almost goes into an IFA. Otherwise, you could get allowance penalties and things, couldn't you?
Oh, look, I think that, yeah, you could go to the extent of doing an IFA, but, I think that if the employee or the employer was to initiate documentation in this example that we're giving, that said something along the lines of, we'd asked you to work from home, but you'd said that you didn't think that was going to be possible due to your family situation and your children being in lockdown. It's essentially calling it for what it is. So that in lieu of being stood down without pay, you have agreed or you have requested to work blah, 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 blah. So, and I think for a very short period in time, that's going to suffice, rather than having to do an IFA, which is an individual flexibility agreement to vary the terms of the award. If we're in lockdown I've got a wooden table, so tap, 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 tap. Touch wood, we're not in lockdown for anything more than 3 days. But if we are, New South Wales is going into week number 7. If we're getting to that sort of jurisdiction or that length in time, I think that we're probably going to need to reevaluate or tighten that up.
Sure. What if I say, look, I work in an office that's got isolation around me. I'm not near anyone. I'd rather come to the office space and work. As an employer, are you allowed to let your employees go to work?
If you have, say, let's just say and this is my own personal example, I said to Phoebe, I'd much rather go and work in the office and be there by myself. As long as the front door wasn't open, you could potentially do that, I believe. If you would not, if you had more than one person in that office, then no. You wouldn't be able to do that, because then you would be essentially breaching the lockdown requirements. So if I was to drive in my car from here to the office, be in the office all day by myself with no other people, and then leave and come home, that would be fine.
Right, because you're not open for business.
No, you
What
wouldn't.
about if it's outside? It would have to be within a 10-kilometre radius of your home too, wouldn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So it would need to be within 10 kilometres that they can get there, and you'll be working by yourself and have no contact with others.
Unless you were an essential service. So let's just say it might be business IT, for example, that, you know, that there may be justifications to go more than 10 kilometres, but I think that that's really outside of our scope of where we sort of focus our expertise. So if you've got further questions, that might be a bit more of a research with Queensland Health and the restrictions rather than our area.
Yeah. And what if you staff need to come in and pick up their monitors and things like that?
That should have been done yesterday.
Right, okay. So really they shouldn't be going into the office at all. They should be locking down today.
Yeah.
Tricky. Now, we've had a few questions come through saying, what is an essential worker? Look, the best thing to do, and we can send it out or post to this, is the link for the Queensland Government website as to what the essential workers are. It's healthcare, it's educational resources, it's takeaway for food and beverage, like restaurants and things like that. There's a number of different ones that are on there. So I don't think there's any point in me listing them, but if you go onto the Queensland Government website, it's very clearly specified out as to what businesses are and aren't determined to be essential workers. Okay, so we've sort of spoken now about the businesses that are in the lockdown area. So basically stay home, if possible, give them work from home. If you can have to do a bit of both, work time off, try and negotiate that, make sure it's well documented down. Essential workers, obviously they can go to work, but you have to work under the Queensland Government health requirements with masks and all of that type of thing as well. What about those businesses that are outside of the region? So in particular Port Douglas, so we're not in a lockdown up here, but we're not getting the traffic coming up from Cairns. We're basically cut off. Are they able to go into a shutdown?
Okay, well, I think that there's 2 points there that I think we can talk about. I just quickly want to answer one of the questions on chat. That was about that working from home question that scenario we went through before. Could 3 employees be working if we maintain 4 meters squared? No. Because the whole lockdown thing is that you do not have, and I think even the restrictions are you're not allowed to have more than 2 people in your house within that. So the answer to that one from our perspective is, if you had 3 people in there, the answer is no. So I just wanted to park that one and finish that one off. So if we've got employees, businesses open up in Port Douglas and our employees are located in Cairns, which I think is actually going to be quite a significant number of people. The people that are in the local government area of essentially Cairns Regional Council. So it's who do you get your rates bill from? Pretty much that's the area. So if you live at Clifton Beach, for example, and you work up in Port Douglas, then Port Douglas is open for trade. Clifton Beach is in a restricted area. So that employee cannot go to work, right? Unless they can work from home, unless there's some flexibility to be able to do that. But they can't travel up to Port Douglas without either some due medical exemption. It's almost like the border passes. How we get that, not 100% sure, don't know that bit, but they can't travel. So yes, they can work from home. But if you're up in Port Douglas and let's just say you're a tour operator or working on one of the boats or owning one of the boat companies, and overnight your supply has essentially dried up, can that business enforce a shutdown or a stand down under the Fair Work Act? My understanding of the Fair Work Act and the words that they use is yes, because there is a supply issue that has affected their trade, which is beyond the employer's control. But what I do want to talk about is shutdowns are pretty definitive things. So even if you are an non-essential business in Cairns that is shut, or you're a Port Douglas business that has the ability to be open, but there's a severe stoppage of work, the stand down provisions are almost one in, all in. So you make a decision to shut down your business or close down your business. You may be able to make a decision to shut down a proportion of your business if there is a very clear link between the stoppage of work or the supply and the demand and the ability to just use one area. So, for example, restaurant, you can still do takeaway, but you can't do dine-in service. So in that respect, you've probably got the ability to stand down your front of house staff, the wait staff and the bar staff, and keep your kitchen staff to be able to do the food and essentially pass it on to the patrons that are paying it. So you can stand down part of your workforce, but it then you have to have a clear link as to which parts you're standing down and which ones you're maintaining.
So what if you're a accommodation up here and you've still got customers here that were already booked and have decided to stay up here over this period, but there's been a severe drop. So we don't need as many housekeeping staff, front office staff, we don't need the maintenance staff as much. Are we able to stand down part of the workforce in Port Douglas as a result?
Oh, that becomes really, really tricky, because remember what I said before, JobKeeper is done and dusted. So all of those JobKeeper enabling directives to be able to temporarily reduce hours, it's past. It's no point going back there just yet. So if you have to ask yourself the question, okay, so I need to have 2 housekeepers rather than 10. How do you as a business select the 2? And that essentially, how is that fair? So you've got to make sure that, again, this flexibility and the negotiation with your employees, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you tried to do the most reasonable and fair thing possible. So where you want to temporarily reduce hours for employees, let's just say you might have 2 full-timers and 8 part-timers, and you say, right, we're going to keep the 2 full-timers engaged, but we really need to do something with the part-timers. Then that essentially, at least you've got some metrics in place to be able to say why you did what you did. But without the JobKeeper enabling directives, if you want to be able to reduce hours and you can't get mutual agreement with your team, then the only other hard and fast rules that apply right at this point in time are the redundancy requirements. So that is basically where you're implementing a significant change into the workplace, which may mean that we can't usefully engage them. So what that means is that the employer's got an obligation to consult and try to come up with a mutual agreement. If they can't come up with a mutual agreement, then they're going to be probably a little bit forced into having to make some decisions that they don't want to make.
And I think this comes down to, if we're following legislation, so there is legislation for redundancy and there's legislation around stand down, but we don't have any legislation for reducing hours because things have got really quiet for us. We did over JobKeeper because there was a reduction of hours. So I think that you just have to work with the legislation as best you can, and that's why consultation, showing flexibility is going to be your best friend. Yes. But if you've got staff that are full-time and they're like, nah, we don't want to reduce our hours, we're in Port Douglas, we don't have to stand down, then your only option is going to be looking at a potential redundancy scenario, which seems a bit crazy, but if you're following the legislation, that's all you've got to go with.
Yeah, and look, I think that there's a couple of key points there that unfortunately, society as a whole is a little bit sick of COVID. and our tolerance and our empathy is a little, it's significantly less than where we were in March last year. So we're all a little bit over it. So our ability to be really flexible might be in some cases a little bit diminished. And I think that employers just need to be aware of that and have that in the forefront of their mind, because at the end of the day, the employer needs to make decisions that are going to allow the business to be sustainable and be financially viable. So that they're going to make decisions today that like they might make decisions today in relation to the ability to work from home, and then on Wednesday they realize that they've run out of work from home, you know, because they've not done this before, so they're testing it all the way along. Then they might have to invoke a stand down. So there's all of these steps that could come into play throughout a lockdown, particularly if it is extended. But our empathy levels are down. The JobKeeper payments are done. The job seeker payments are done. So there's no financial support. Employees will then go into that fear factor mode again about how am I going to pay my bills and how am I going to feed my children? And that's that whirlwind that they will go through. And the employer's going through their own whirlwind about how am I going to keep my business open? How am I going to keep people employed? And the two whirlwinds are going like this, but they're not actually connecting in the middle. That magic sweet spot is when they're connecting in the middle, and I don't have a magic recipe for that. I wish I did, because, you know.
Well, that's consultation. That's trying to get them to understand. So if you just go in hard and fast, and as a business, we can't afford it, and you'll have to do this, and do you know how much this is costing us? If you go in as an employer with that attitude, you're potentially not going to have a lot of empathy. Whereas if you come in with the staff and say, okay, this is the situation, you know, we're all hurting, this is what we could do, you know, what are your thoughts? Is anyone happy to take some time without pay? How can we work with this? I think you're more likely to get a much better result with it. So, you know, it's not about you, it's about them when you're doing that consultation as to what you can do to support them.
Yeah, and I think that's that switch, because that whirlwind of being a business owner, I don't for a second discount how full on that is. And quite often when we go into those consultations, we don't take the time to go, right, just stop. I know I've got all of this happening here, and I know where my focus is, and I know what I'm trying to achieve. We just have to stop and breathe, because there's this whole other whirlwind going on over here that's about to come in your front door.
With your staff. So listen to the staff, see what their concerns are. I know there have been some payments for down south for employees that have been stood down. They haven't been enacted for up here. I suspect that it would have to be for 7 days or longer before they'll be looking at eligibility for that. I don't know if that's correct, but I'm pretty sure down in Southeast Queensland that they didn't introduce that until that lockdown got extended.
Yeah, and look, I think that they are the Centrelink once-off COVID payments, so that they're not a JobKeeper, they're not a job seeker or anything like that. They're a once-off payment that was initiated by Centrelink.
Each week? Isn't it each week you get it?
There was a 2-week period. So, and they were the 2 weeks that were affected by their lockdown. So, and you had to have lost, don't quote me, there's a whole COVID section on the Centrelink or Human Services website about what the payments are and who's eligible for them. I think if you lost partial hours, you could get $450. If you lost full hours, you could get $750 for week 1 and week 2. The areas that Centrelink has defined are very much in that Southeast Queensland section that was locked down by Anastasia on the 31st of July. I expect that will be updated, but whether or not they will allow the payments for FNQ for a lockdown of 3 days, that's an unknown.
Hasn't come through yet. Yeah.
No.
Okay, so we've got a few questions that I'm just going to go through now. Do we need to pay employees during lockdown? Hopefully we've clarified that. Yes, they've got annual leave, they've got tour. Now, if you're in a cash tight scenario and you're not able to pay them their annual leave, really your legal obligation is always to be able to pay out that annual leave. Otherwise, it is an insolvency situation. However, I think negotiation, talking about half pay, looking at what you can do is the best option. And you might want to give us a call if that's going to be a situation that you're faced with, that you're got staff on stand down, they've got annual leave or toil they want to be paid, and you don't have the cash there, and we can talk through what the best ways to do that. Can you advise protocols for stand down of staff of lockdown extends if they are apprentices back to work or job maker? Look, it's exactly the same. There's no difference. Obviously, you're not going to, I don't know what the legislation is, but they're not going to say you're not going to get payments if you're not going to become eligible if you've got these back to work. If you're on stand down, I expect they'll just push it out the other end for the number of weeks that you have to employ them for. So that just wouldn't make sense otherwise. So as long as you're not standing them down, as long as if your area is in a lockdown, you could stand down people that are on those schemes. Should we be accepting accommodation bookings arriving in the lockdown? Oh, that's out of our area of expertise. I did read something, Connor. I think you can, but I think you have to explain to them, that while they're going to be staying in your accommodation, that they will only be able to go out once a day or go out in a 10-kilometre radius, etc. So it's pretty tight as to what they'll be able to do. I've asked the team to stay home as we're not essential. However, the Queensland Government website says if not listed as non-essential, then you can open, so team want to come in. What do I do and how? I'm not sure where you've seen that, but my understanding is that businesses should not be open if you are on a lockdown unless you're an essential business. So as I said, Deanne said before, look, if your business is within a 10-kilometre radius of their home, and they're the only person there and you're not opening the doors, I don't think that's a huge issue, that they could walk there and work in the office and walk home as long as there's no one else in the office. But that's probably a bit of a stretch of the rules with it. Like, unless you're an essential business, staff should not be going to the workplace to work. What determines, Yarrab is closed, no buses available. Therefore, even if you're an essential business over in Yarrab, you may not be able to open if there's not able to get a car and transportation there. The essential worker, that is clearly defined when you go onto the Queensland Government website. There's quite a long list of it. Can you cover pay options for employees who live in lockdown but work in Port Douglas? So that's exactly the same as the others. So if you're a business in Port Douglas or in Innisfail but your staff are in the lockdown area, basically they're on stand down, so they could access their annual leave or their toil time off, or it's unpaid. I'm an essential worker, live in the Tablelands. Can I come to work in Cairns and go home safely afterwards? That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think you can if you're an essential worker. You are able to travel to and from work, even if you're allowed to within the Cairns area. So I can't imagine why you wouldn't be able to if you live up in the Tablelands area. But obviously, really following all of those restrictions, COVID restrictions, is important. It's not like you're going across the border, Victoria to New South Wales. That is obviously a different situation. We're an essential service. However, I won't send the kids to school. If I was an employee, would I still have the right to be paid carers, personal leave? Yeah, we discussed this beforehand. I think that if you have got a genuine concern about sending your kids to school and you want to keep them home, I think that it could be viewed as harsh and unreasonable for an employer not to pay carers leave for employers that are staying home to look after their kids over this time if they don't want them to go to school. I don't know. Again, this law hasn't been tested. But that would just be my gut reaction, would be if they're staying home to look after their kids, that you should probably allow them the option of accessing their personal leave. Businesses in Cairns, I have employees working in Port Douglas equally affected by the lockdown. Can Port Douglas staff come under the Cairns banner and be included? There's an interesting one, because I know part of the business is Cairns and part of the business is in Port Douglas. If you've got staff that are in Port Douglas that are working on the side of the business that's down in Cairns, obviously you'd be able to put them in lockdown. If you've got Port Douglas staff that can't go out, that it's just been a reduction, that goes down again to you're not actually on stand down here in that Port Douglas arm of the business. So you would have to look at doing some consultation with them about reduction of hours, etc. You have a question?
But I have a question. No, I just wanted to add into that. I think if the business office is in Cairns and that's the primary hub, and the hub is closed, and the Port Douglas staff can't, get to the hub, or that hub provides the significant either filtration of work to them, they could actually, I think that they could be included under that same banner as being stood down. Like if the Port Douglas staff are travelling to Cairns to work and that business is shut, then they're an employee of a business that's affected by a Queensland Government Health Directive. So it's not as though you can have the Port Douglas employees come down as far as Wongetti and sit on the side of the road and go, right, we can work from here, because the operation is in Cairns.
I 100%, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Does the employer have an obligation to provide the means to work from home? Yes, you do. And this was where it was really challenging, because it happened yesterday afternoon. So Deanne, being the fine person that she was straight onto the phone to everyone saying, come into work this afternoon and pick up your computers and your laptops and anything you need and your screens so you can work from home. So we managed to get all our staff in to do that yesterday. You're in a bit of a tricky scenario at the moment. If you didn't get staff if you weren't able to do that, there may be a few ways around it. I am assuming that Officeworks is open, so whether or not you're able to get Officeworks, and look, probably for the 3 days it's not worth it, but if it does extend, if you need to get Officeworks to do delivery of any equipment, if there's any way that you can get any computers, monitors, those types of things out to your staff, that would be good.
And look,
it is tricky.
Yeah, and I think that if an employer was essentially trying to allow employees to go in and get their equipment to be able to work from home, if you applied a logical sequence that, it was only one person in the office at one time, so you had Mary going in at 9 and Joe going in at 10, essentially to try and give the facility to be able to work from home, I don't think you're going to be in breach of the Fair Work requirements. Whether Queensland Health would actually agree with you, that bit I don't know. But you certainly wouldn't want everybody coming in at 9 o'clock, right, let's have a team meeting, let's talk about it, then let's go home. No. So I think that, or even as an employer, if you were to go and collect equipment and then drop it off to an employee, box on the
do
doorstep,
non-contact, just dropping it at the gate.
Yeah, and I think that all of those things, they've got merit in being able to try and work through. Is it 100% strictly legal? We can't answer that from a Queensland Health perspective.
If we're an essential business which can continue to operate, but one or some staff are in enforced quarantine due to being close contact and an exposure site, how do we treat those staff? So the staff member that has been put into an enforced quarantine won't be able to come to work. Yes, Deanne, you.
I have a question. So 2 areas that we're talking about. One is a lockdown, which is what the general population is. The other is isolation and quarantine. Right. So that they are essentially separate things.
So if you have an enforced quarantine, my understanding is that Queensland Health will advise you of that. Is that right?
Yeah. Well,
so if Queensland Health have not come to your business and said you must isolate all your staff in an enforced quarantine for a 14-day period, and in that case, they're not allowed to leave their house at all, it's super, super strict with those enforced quarantines, they will advise you of that. So for that one staff member will get that, and it would be up to Queensland Health to determine whether or not any other staff at your business need to also go into an enforced quarantine for 14 days.
Yeah, and I think that let's talk about the leave requirements or the payment requirements for quarantine and isolation versus lockdown. So lockdown is a stand down, the leave without pay section, or stood down without pay under Section 524. If you've got an employee that is in isolation or quarantine that may extend beyond our lockdown period, those people are required to either use their annual leave to cover their isolation and quarantine period, or their RDOs, or their time off in lieu, or if they have the ability to work from home in quarantine, then that's great too. You can do all of those things. The personal leave is a debate that comes out. I think we get this question quite often. Can an employee use personal leave to cover an isolation or a quarantine? And when we're talking about that, we're talking about, the mandatory 14 days isolation. You as an individual have to isolate or quarantine. there was a case, and it was I don't know what the case name is, but it was published by HR Daily, I believe. It was last year, I believe, where Fair Work had heard a matter that an employer had allowed an employee to access their personal leave to cover an isolation period. Some months later, that person or that individual had an illness or injury, non-COVID related, that then legitimately required the use of that personal leave, but they didn't have it because they were afforded that leave in isolation where they weren't genuinely unwell. So in that particular the case that was reviewed, Fair Work made a decision that yes, their personal leave should be recredited. It's not so much a payment issue because they would have either taken annual leave or leave without pay during the isolation. It's a reshuffle of leave. But what we did learn is that if an employee is not unwell, then personal leave should not be provided.
Even in enforced quarantine.
Yeah. If the person has to go and get a COVID test, yes, they can have personal leave for the duration of what it takes to go and get a COVID test. Or if they become unwell in that quarantine period, then they would flick over to the use of personal leave.
This brings up a couple of other points that I just thought we should talk about. There are some awards which have pandemic leave, and some of those awards I think have got paid pandemic leave. I think the ones related to aged care may have. So just double check your award to see whether you've got that or not. The other issue that has come up, so if you are a business, say in Innisfail or Port Douglas, and you had a staff member that was in Cairns on Saturday, and they have now come back to the area, so they were in Cairns before the lockdown was announced. As a business, you're like, you were in Cairns, you may have been exposed. I don't want you to come to work. You would not be able to force them to stand down unless you paid them because they weren't there. If they were there after 4 o'clock yesterday, yes, they're meant to be isolating, aren't they? Is that correct, Deanne? I think so. After 4 o'clock yesterday, you had to go into
lockdown.
So
are you talking about a person going back home to Port Douglas?
Yeah, so they were down in Cairns on Saturday doing the shopping at some
Sunday.
of the exposed sites, and then on Saturday, so before there was even the lockdown, they've come back and you're like, I still don't want you in my business. You can't force someone, you can stand them down, but you'd have to do it with pay, wouldn't you?
Yeah, unless they were advised by Queensland Health that they were at a site through their COVID tracking that was a close contact site, then they would be required by Queensland Health, not Fair Work, but by Queensland Health to go into isolation.
Yeah. So you just have to be a little bit.
If they were nowhere near any of those tracking sites or any of those exposure sites, then there's not really a reason from a Queensland Health perspective for them to isolate. So therefore, from a Fair Work perspective, then you have to, there's no reason for you to stand them down other than your, I don't want to discount the severity of it, other than your personal fears.
Yeah. What about if you're an essential company but choose to close to be safe? Is that a conversation between employee and employer? Annual leave, RDO and unpaid, or even the employer may decide to pay as normal. Is that okay? Always okay to pay as normal. As an essential company, you don't have to open over this period. You can choose. So if you're a restaurant, you could, if you want to, do takeaways or Uber Eats or something like that, but you've decided, you know what, it's not worth it for whatever reason, or you don't want to, you don't have to open. Is that your understanding too, Deanne?
Yes, but I think in that situation, you be prepared for some kickback from your employees because your work hasn't been stopped. So unless you were linking it to the financial viability rather than the government directive, because if you're a restaurant that does takeaway, like the local fish and chip shop down the road predominantly does takeaway, and they said, you know what, it's not worth it, those employees would automatically be assuming that they would be working because they fall within the category of businesses that are able to be open. And if you're going to shut them down, you're going to need some fairly heavy consultation to get them across the line to be okay with that, because the Fair Work Act says that you can stand people down because of a government enforced lockdown or where there is a stoppage of work. Your work hasn't stopped.
Yeah. This is a good question. This is about vulnerable staff. If they're not recommended to work due to health, what is their leave situation? Is it classified as sick leave? And what if they've got none left? So I'm assuming in that situation that you're either an essential business or you're in the out of the work, the lockdown area, but the staff member is vulnerable. That would be, they'd need a letter from their medical practitioner and then they could get sick leave. Do you think, yeah?
Look, I think that there's probably, I think if you ask 4 different HR practitioners about this question, you're likely to get 4 different answers, to be honest. If the business is open and the employee cannot work from the business location, then yes, there's going to need to be some form of medical evidence. If the employee can work from home, that's great. If the employee can't work from home, then we're really going down a different path that is well and truly outside of the lockdown, the stand down provisions and everything else. So if they don't have any personal leave, potentially, yes, it could be classed as personal leave if they are vulnerable and they should be at home and there's no work to do. They're unwell enough to be able to physically present to work. So yes, personal leave could apply in that particular case, but there'd need to be medical substantiation for that. If they didn't have personal leave, then they'd be looking at annual leave.
Yeah. What if you're a tradie that technically can work as essential worker, but you make the decision to postpone the work as you and your employees are going into people's homes and businesses? Can we stand down the business? I would have said yes. If the business is closed down.
Essentially can work as an essential worker, but you make the decision to postpone the work as you and your employees are going into people's homes and businesses. Look, I think that this is one of those situations which invokes my favorite analogy of all time, or my favorite quote. You can drive 80 in a 60 zone as many times as you want, provided there's no copper on the side of the road that tells you not to. So I think that the areas of challenge there, you're an essential worker, so yes, you can be open. This goes back to that situation where employers are being very cautious, and I'm not saying don't be cautious about postponing the work because you're going into people's home and potentially exposing your employees. So I think that there's a few considerations. There's a workplace health and safety perspective. Are you trying to eliminate the risk as much as possible? Is there a stoppage of work? Is there a government lockdown? If you were really concerned about your employees, I think that I would try and enforce the stand down. I'd go down that path thinking that, yes, I'm meeting these criteria as a business, with making sure that we're applying duty of care and all of those things. If an employee challenged you for invoking a stand down that you were not able to do, then Fair Work is going to tell you otherwise. Fair Work will tell you.
This is just a question that's come back saying, going back to, what if my business or work is not listed as essential? Can they still operate if they want to? And someone's just sent me information from the website that says if a business is not listed, it can operate. You should only leave home for a permitted purpose. You should, as much as possible, stay at home and find ways to support the business through contactless means. Now, so what they're saying is that businesses don't have to close down. So businesses like HR Dynamics, we don't have to close down, but our staff are unable to leave their home unless it's for a permitted purpose. So I would still say that would mean that unless it's within a 10-kilometre radius and they're shopping or exercising or things like that, they shouldn't be leaving home, wouldn't you, Deanne?
Yeah, unless they are required to go to work, because work is one of those criteria. So I'm not 100% sure. And look, I think that a lot of these questions there could be multiple answers for it, and we're all trying to feel our way through with what we know at this point in time, because this is our first lockdown. So we got our training wheels on. I think the 10-kilometre radius applies for the shopping, the exercise, etc. But if I work at Queensland Health, for example, that's more than 10 kilometres away from my house.
Yeah, but that's an essential business.
Yeah.
I'm talking about if it's a non-essential business. would you be able to? And I see what you've got from that. And I know some businesses are opening, but I'm not 100% confident in saying that businesses are able to open and have employees come into their workplace unless they're deemed as an essential work business and an essential worker.
That's it. And again, you can drive 80 in a 60 zone. You can open your business until the police come and tell you to stop it. So yeah. Like we get calls all the time about, oh, well, Joe Blow down the road's open. That doesn't mean that Joe Blow should be open or can be open. It means that he's chosen to drive 80 in a 60 zone until somebody tells him that he can't.
Okay, as an employee of full-time staff of an allied health business, we are classified as essential. However, we have noticed a significant downturn in business. Should the lockdown be extended by another week, are we able to ask staff to take annual leave? Yeah, this is a really hard one where you're sort of an essential, you can open, but you've got to reduce capacity. What are your thoughts on that one, Deanne? I think that comes down to that consultation with it, doesn't it? And how you're able to demonstrate that you did it fairly, people weren't targeted and how they got chosen, really working with the staff.
It comes down to the negotiation and flexibility. So consultation, negotiation, flexibility, outcome.
Asking for volunteers. You'll be very exposed if that staff member that you suddenly don't give shifts to, they complained about their wage rate or a bullying claim last week, or there's something else that they could sort of say that they've been treated unfairly in comparison to others. So you really need to show that this is not a personal attack. This is a business decision for the viability of what we were able to offer, and we were as fair and as transparent as we could about it.
Yeah.
What about casuals? Would you need to be stood down or just not allocated? Look,
stand down, straight up.
Stand down.
Because casuals are not casuals anymore, and we know that you've got casual employees that may have been with your business for quite a period in time. You need to stand them down. Apply the same principles.
If staff go out and get tested and are asked to isolate until result, can they utilise sick leave, or would it just be leave without pay or annual leave? I thought they could get sick leave until they got their test results.
No, whilst they're undertaking, well, I think, again, it's a debatable point. Are they unwell? Are they physically able to come into work had they not had to go and get that test? So my understanding
but then once
is that
they get the test that they're told to stay, like if they've got symptoms and they've got a test.
Well, are they unwell? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So if they've got a cough, sniffle, fever, they're probably unwell. So when they may need to get a medical certificate for that, or if people have had the flu all the way through COVID and not had COVID, so they may still be unwell. But if they are, let's just say me, I feel great, I feel fine, I haven't got a sniffly nose, but I went to rain trees during one of those times. So I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to go and get tested, but I'm not unwell. I'm physically fine. So I go and get tested. I get my negative results back. Happy days. I get my positive results back, even though I may not think that I had COVID and I'm proven to have it. Then I'm unwell.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've got through most of the questions now.
I'm just going to check
the chats.
The chats. Just give me 1 second.
As we said, a lot of it is going into this as transparency, common sense, talking to your employees. Obviously, things are going to change if we do go into an extended lockdown as to what that communication, what you're able to do with the working from home. If you've got any concerns, you don't hesitate to give us a call. If you need a working from home policy, then please don't hesitate to contact us. We can help you with those. It is a tricky time. Everyone is highly sensitive at this time as well. So make sure you take a deep breath and that you act with empathy and consideration in talking to your staff, because this is when we do see, and this has happened before last year. It was terrible when suddenly things go take a dive bomb with the relationship, and it can be really hard to recover, and we get to some pretty sticky places with our staffing. So building that relationship and showing that you're there to support them, and understanding that it is tough for them. It's tough for you as a business, we know that, but you also need to really acknowledge that this is really, really challenging to your staff who are feeling particularly vulnerable at the moment, and you need to show some empathy towards that. Will hopefully help us all ride through this, and fingers crossed it will only be a very short lockdown.
Yeah, and if I can just add in, like, I get that it's been, there's so many questions and stuff that have come through the chat and through the Q&A. It's really, really difficult for us as presenters to cover off on every situation and scenario, because there's always a but, and there's always a what if, and there's always maybe a little bit that we're not 100% sure on right at this point in time. So if we haven't answered your question, or you've still got, I'm not really 100% sure, give us a call. All of the HR dynamic phones are diverted to me today, so I get the fun job. So please be patient with us as well, because we're trying to service a number of employers throughout the Cairns region that are all in the same boat. So we will get back to you, but please, if we haven't answered your question or you're still confused, take the time to pick up the phone and we can talk to you one-on-one.
Super. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deanne. Bye.
Bye.